So I'm going to take this opportunity to kick off the meeting and just let everyone know that we're so excited to welcome Studio Q. They're a trio of GBDA alumni who recently launched their own product design agency, Studio Q, which is comprised of Amy Q. Cooper, Katie Jones, and Michaela Valaket. And I'm going to read their bios in a little bit, but just to let you know how the meeting is going to look, I'm Greg McIntyre. I'm the digital media manager here at Stratford, and I'll be hosting, as well as Lauren Kokanowski, who is the recruitment and admissions coordinator for the Stratford School, and she'll be moderating the questions in the chat as well. So after their presentation, Lauren will be hosting and moderating the chat. So to give you a little biography of who we're listening to, there's Amy Q. Cooper, as I mentioned, Katie Jones, and Michaela Valaket. So Amy Q. Cooper is the founder and product designer at Studio Q, and she's worked in a variety of industries in both corporate and studio settings for the last 5 years. In every project, Amy uses her empathetic and user-centered thinking to create purposeful products using data, strategy, and design. She has also been taking over the UW Stratford Instagram account this last week, so you've likely seen her. And Katie is a visual designer at Studio Q and also works with Communitech Digital Main Street program to create digital products for businesses in Southern Ontario. She's used her graphic design skills to create print and digital designs for a variety of companies, ranging from magazine publishers to 3D printing companies. Katie's love for fine arts has given her a passion for creating beautiful and usable solutions for any market and demographic. And Michaela is the marketing specialist at Studio Q Designs and also works with TD to improve their customer experiences. She focused on using her UX and marketing skills with a variety of organizations, especially startups in the KW area. Michaela uses a research-driven approach by leveraging data and user research to deliver impactful solutions to businesses and their ecosystem. So thanks for being willing to share your knowledge, expertise, and your life journey with us. Over to you, Studio Q.
Awesome. Yeah, so kind of like as Greg introduced, we are the Studio Q team, and together we work on designing products, which is really exciting. We are GBDA alumni, and we are also really good friends. So it's kind of a bit of insight and living proof that you can work with your friends and make it work, and it can be really exciting. So I founded this agency myself, but that being said, Michaela and Katie played a very, very crucial role in its ability to be where it is, and also the ability for us to take on projects. So I certainly would not be having this conversation with you guys without them. So definitely important to mention. My role on the team is as a product designer. That means that I combine user experience and user interface design. But the reason that makes it a little bit different than UX and UI is that I also focus on how the products will live in their ecosystem and how they will impact the business. So it's a little bit more focused on what the results are from creating the products, as well as just focusing on the users that they're made for. So I'll kind of let Michaela and Katie introduce themselves as well. I don't know if Michaela or you want to go first.
Sure. So I welcome everybody and thanks for coming. I see some questions on the chat, so I'm excited to answer some of those. I had a really difficult time figuring out what I wanted to do for most of university because I was so interested in many different areas. I really loved the research element and investigating more of that end. And then Katie and Amy were really awesome to collaborate with all throughout my university experience, since we were on a lot of groups together. So that kind of led to a great trio of us. But I have worked with startups. I work at TD now. I'm on the front line to gain some experience. It's been really great for learning about really empathizing with people and breaking down assumptions. Because we kind of live in a bubble in university and can kind of get detached from really relating to all these different people. And the pandemic has been very reflective of that. So I'm happy to answer any questions regarding that and my leads experience. So I do marketing mostly, and that is pretty different from product design and visual design, but I find it's a nice combination for me because I love UX, but I get to combine that with how are we going to drive this into sales later. So yeah, I look forward to answering your questions.
And I'm Katie, so I'm the visual designer for Studio Q. So I kind of help Amy with the visual aspects of the product design. So creating buttons and icons and like pretty much anything that you look at. But yeah, I've really enjoyed working with Studio Q so far and getting real world experience with putting my visual assets into the world.
Awesome. Just to clarify, Katie definitely does way more than just make buttons. She's definitely being very nice about it. She's an incredible illustrator, and Mikhail is an incredible marketing specialist as well. And they do a lot of awesome work that is crucial to being able to make successful products and also run a successful business as well. With that being said, so the first topic that we'd like to talk about is our GBDA experience, since you guys are more most likely in the program in itself. And the first thing that we'd like to talk about is our living arrangements. So personally, actually all three of us, we lived in residence in first year in Waterloo. In second year, we also lived in Waterloo, but in our third and fourth year, when our program moves full-time to Stratford, we actually did live in Stratford. So I'll kind of focus on my experience, and then Michaela and Katie can talk about theirs. And so the reason why I personally wanted to live in Stratford was because I did not want to commute. I also wasn't really in the position where I knew if I was going to have a car, and I didn't want to have to rely on somebody else. You do see a lot of people who are waiting for their ride shares or have to leave early because of their ride shares. A little bit different right now due to the circumstances of the world. There's come a time where you have to make the choice. There definitely are a lot of things to consider. And I would definitely be on the side pro living in Stratford as opposed to Waterloo, but that's a personal opinion that I have there. In terms of how GBDA applies to the real world, I really strongly believe that by going through the program, I was able to get the tools and resources and learning experiences that I needed to, go out in the real world and have a real job. I think that there's a lot of kind of imposter syndrome when you go through this program. You see all those incredible designers in the world, and you feel like there's a pretty big jump from graduating to, seeing those professionals that work at Uber and Google and stuff like that. But I can 100% tell you the professionals that I've worked with, the other design agencies that I've worked with, and just the clients, the stuff that you're doing in GBDA is very much so relevant to the real world and is very on par with what they're expecting. So don't feel at all that they're just group projects. They are, but I would strongly encourage to, and I guess making the most of it would be to take the group projects on as if they're for real clients and you're solving real problems. It's going to make, your jobs later down the line a lot easier to go through, but it's also going to give you stuff that you can use on your portfolio. So Michaela, I don't know if you want to go next and you can talk about your GBDA experience.
So my GBDA experience, I agree with Amy, gave me a lot of the tools that I needed to succeed. I do think that a part of university is just gaining the tools to think critically and then moving forward from that to self-learn and learn self-discipline. So that was a really kind of important aspect of just being in university and joining clubs, building your network there. I chose to live in Stratford as well because I'm from Stratford, so that was kind of convenient. And I have a bit of a network in Stratford, so I liked that. I also didn't want to commute that far every day, but I do love Waterloo a lot and I missed it. So I totally understand why a lot of the people choose to live in Waterloo. Also, I did live in Waterloo when I was working more for startups because the environment that you're working in is a lot less kind of structured and systematic in terms of building a routine. So I didn't know if I was going to have to be somewhere at 11 p.m. at night to help somebody with something. So being in Waterloo was really beneficial in terms of access. GBDA applies to the real world pretty well in terms of collaborating with people, understanding group dynamics, and what your role is and what you can contribute is really important. So trying those different roles in your classes. I know that somebody said, did I find the courses in upper year useful to my marketing role? Yes, they were, but you have to remember everything's very kind of generalized. So going out and learning your own things like SEO, Google Trends, Google Analytics, really use the resources available and those that they kind of make you aware of in school and then pursuing it yourself. And I would think that that's how you make the most out of GBDA.
So I guess for me, my experience, I did the same thing as Amy. I lived in Waterloo. I lived in residence first year and in Waterloo second year and then Stratford the next 2 years. For me, I think I really enjoyed living in Stratford the last 2 years because all of my friends were there and we were able to kind of build a community that way. For me, I'm like pretty social. I like to go out, do all that sort of thing. And Stratford doesn't have a lot of opportunities for that. But once I got into third and fourth year, having that group of friends there, I think really still made it worthwhile living there. And it didn't really bother me as much that I couldn't go out to like clubs and everything every night sort of thing. Um, Going into how GBDA applies to the real world, I think one thing that's really good to remember when I was in GBDA, a lot of the time I had thoughts of like, oh, why am I doing this? I want to be a graphic designer. I don't want to do coding. I don't want to do this and this and this. And at the time, I did have a few thoughts where I was like, this isn't really what I want to do. This doesn't pertain to my industry. But entering the real world, the business knowledge that you'll get from GBDA, even the stuff that stays in the back of your mind, I think really has been helpful. Knowing just the basics of HTML and CSS makes designing a website a lot easier for you to comprehend in your mind. And just knowing all that stuff, I think really was valuable. And I don't think I saw it at the time. And then how do you make the most of GBDA? I think just, yeah, really putting your all into your projects, making them seem like it's a real world experience. Um, GBA has a lot of resources when it comes to building your portfolio. And that's something that I didn't really recognize was unique to GBDA. A lot of other design programs I don't think have as thorough portfolio courses and stuff like that. So I think to make the most of GBDA, really just taking what they give you and doing the most that you can with it is the best thing to do there.
For sure. And I would mention too that although, like working with the GBDA campus, there's not as much, clubs and stuff like that per se. There are still a lot of ways that you can get involved. I worked throughout every semester of GBDA, and a lot of my jobs actually were from the University of Waterloo. And there was never an issue of it being remote work or not being able to go back and forth every single day. There's also TA placements, and there are, things like the Creators Collective and stuff like that as well. So there are a lot of opportunities still to, feel a part of the community as well. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is studying abroad, which I'm hoping that a majority of you are definitely still able to do despite what's going on right now. But we'll kind of give a bit of a rundown of, what we did, as well as kind of hopefully prompt any questions that you guys have if you are in the process of, looking forward to applying or traveling as well. So we actually all studied in the same place. We all went to Leeds in England, and we studied at the University of Leeds. But there are definitely some differences between our experiences. So one of them would be that at the University of Leeds, they have different schools or kind of, programs kind of. And the one that I focused on was graphic and communications design, which is really cool because they have different versions of the design school. It's not just called design school. So Katie will also talk a little bit more about the different school that she was in as well. And so I lived like right in a campus residence, which was awesome. And I also was able to find some time to travel as well. So I traveled to some close by countries, like Amsterdam and Germany and stuff like that, which is really cool. And then the main beneficial thing that I found that I gained from it, aside from the very fun and exciting experience, was that I had a lot of portfolio pieces that I made at my time there, that I was able to use later on that helped me get jobs. Something that's really cool about this school in particular is that they're really focused on design. And we had the opportunity to actually, in one of our classes, work with the BBC. They had approached our professor and had asked them to facilitate a activity over the entire semester of helping them redesign their website. And that was a really cool experience, very relevant, and something that I was able to use on my portfolio. In terms of tips, I would definitely say, enjoy yourself and have fun. It's an incredible opportunity. But I would also say there are a lot of areas to benefit yourself professionally and academically as well. Like I said, adding stuff to your portfolio. I'm actually interested in coding, so I took a Python class. And so stuff like that is really beneficial so that when you come back, you are kind of able to do some extra stuff that maybe you wouldn't otherwise have done in GBDA. So Michaela can now talk about her stuff.
Yes, so Leeds was a really interesting experience for me because I it was my first time going to Europe, so that was really exciting. Although I have family there, so it was really nice to experience that. And I was in a residence that had both local students and also foreign students, so it was kind of a nice mix and probably had a bit too much fun. But Leeds was really interesting for me because I used to have a massive procrastination problem, and I did really poorly on one of my classes because I waited until the very last week to complete every single one of my assignments, which in Leeds, they let you do that. You don't have to like hand things in as you go. You usually have like one big paper or assignment that's due. And I was like, oh, it's gonna be fun. This is just, it's fine. I can do this. And I left like 5 assignments all to the last week. And most all of them were fine except for one that I was like, I spent 24 hours just staying up all night finishing it, which is not a good idea. Don't do that. When you go away, make sure you are diligently doing your work. But that was a really good learning experience for me because I then realized you can't procrastinate like that all the time. But I know that a lot of us do. So be cognizant of that. And I mean, have a really great time, make a lot of friends. You are young, but get your work done. And I have to say, I thought that studying abroad was a really, really great choice because the style of education in Leeds was very different from here. Both are really, really great, but I really love theory, and Leeds offered that. So the in terms of really delving into the history side of design and why design has evolved to where it's at now, and really looking into um, provoking that streamline of thought and developing kind of those questions that we need to ask as marketers, as designers, and kind of people who are empathetic. So I took a data analytics class, which was really, really interesting. So maybe don't just think of all the design things like Amy took a coding. Think of what really interests you and how you're going to relate that. And I think you'll be more successful. Yeah.
Cool. So for me, I also went to Leeds. And this is kind of like what Amy was saying, but she took the graphic and communications school, and then I was in the art and design school, which for me, I'm really interested in fine art, and that's kind of what brought me to GBDA. Fine art was what I really liked in high school, And then I thought GBDA was a good mixture of fine art and then also some real world applications. And the art and design school was very much fine art. It was like creating, painting, stuff like that. So for me, I chose that school because I was using the University of Leeds as an opportunity to kind of go back to that and develop those skills a little bit more. Looking back on it, I'm not sure if it would be the choice that I would make now. Um, I didn't get a ton of portfolio pieces, although I did have a great time and I love making art like that. When you're choosing your courses, I guess just think about what you value the most. If you think that getting a bunch of portfolio pieces will be the thing to do, then that might sway your choices a little bit. Um, and some tips that I have, I think travel as much as possible. It's almost unbelievable how cheap it is to travel throughout Europe, and there's some great deals. That's and also don't necessarily, this is kind of opposite advice with Michaela, but don't necessarily make it all about school. Um, for me, I think going there really helped me grow as a person. I had never really spent that much time in a place where I didn't know very many people. I had to make new friends. And like for that reason, I think I grew a ton while I was there. And I also got the G of the GBDA, the global the global aspect of the world. And like Michaela said, the courses and how people look at design and how people view the world, it is slightly different in every place that you go. And so going anywhere in the world really will get you a new perspective on that sort of thing and maybe make you better at whatever industry you choose to go into.
100%. And I think across the board, we all just recommend like balance and think about what you really want to get out of it. If it's you need more portfolio pieces or you're looking for like the specific area, all that stuff. There's no one way to do it. There's no best school of all the choices. It really depends on what you want to get out of it. So let's talk about internships, which is probably something that a majority of you are probably curious about. In terms of where we work, so I worked at RBC in downtown Toronto, and I was a web and digital media designer. I got the job actually not through Waterloo Works, but that being said, I applied just as rapidly to Waterloo Works programs as I did to stuff outside of it. I must have probably applied to like well over 100 jobs, to be honest, and it was definitely tough. One of the hardest parts about the internship process was that a lot of people got them much earlier. I saw a lot of people get them in January and February, and I didn't get mine until about mid-March, and that was really stressful. I started to kind of feel a little bit defeated. I started to also panic because I needed it to graduate. But I guess one thing I want to say is that that's 100% normal. It doesn't matter if you get it in January or February or March. All that matters is that at the end of the day that you get there. And even then, have conversations with your academic advisor, and they're more than happy to work with you to figure out a solution. And so I guess the greatest piece of advice I would say is just to keep applying and making sure that you're putting all the effort that you can in your portfolio, your resumes and your cover letters and stuff. In terms of the actual job process, mine had a phone call interview. I had a design challenge, and then I also had an in-person interview in Toronto that I had to attend. So they were all really interesting. If you have more questions about the design challenge, I'm happy to answer that after. But just to get through it, they asked me to create a promotional video for a program that they were running. But the interesting part was that the brief actually had incorrect information. And so part of the test was actually to see if I was going to go and research and check that data, which I did, and that's partially why I got the job. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to consider. In terms of what I learned, I worked on the Agile Change Management team, which means that I helped the organization of RBC implement the Agile methodology of work across their entire business, which was really, really interesting. On the flip side, there's the traditional waterfall approach of how workflow goes, And it's really cool to see how, there's a lot of pushback of, we don't want agile, which I've also seen in GBDA. And I know GBDA is kind of moving more towards the agile workflow, which is really interesting and really beneficial in the real world. So that was really awesome. The projects I worked on were everything from videos to I did a lot of internal website designs and stuff like that, which was awesome. In terms of getting the job you want, the biggest recommendation I would say is make sure that your portfolio reflects the work that you want to do. If you don't find that you're getting that out of GBDA, then either work on personal projects or look at some freelance stuff. Michaela?
Yes, so like Amy said, don't rely on GBDA to be the only thing that's going to help you get a job. Having a degree from the University of Waterloo is definitely helpful, and extracting what you can from our program also helps, but how you actually get the job is by all the things that you do outside of it and connecting with the people beforehand, kind of developing those relationships to communicate and learn about the position that you really are interested in and how you are going to add value to them. So I worked at Generali Global Health Services, which is an insurance company that is mainly operating all over Europe and the US. So they have operations in Canada because it costs them a bit less. So I was a UX designer and project analyst, and I did a few different kind of roles within that. So like Amy, it was more corporate. So they have much more structure to how they execute their work processes, which I really like because it's easier to see your deliverables and put them into a portfolio. I got to work on a chatbot, working with a coder to look at the way the lips move and how we can make a chatbot look like it's chatting authentically than just lips going open and shut. So that was really fun. The way that I got the job was actually through Waterloo Works, which I was kind of surprised about because you should not actually I wasn't surprised about it. I'm not saying the Waterloo Works is bad, but when you are looking for your internship, make sure that you're not just looking at Waterloo Works. Make sure that you're going out and actually speaking to people. I find that actually walking into places really helps as well because despite the digital world, actually meeting somebody and then understanding your presence is really important. So I've developed a lot of connections just that way in Waterloo. And what I learned probably the most from working at Generali was the difference between startup, which is really much more fast paced and, in my opinion, more disorganized. You, the corporate world is very structured, and if you are going in there, they may say that they want you to be a UX designer, but they actually want you to just execute their plan. So understand that, but always remember that those people are busy. So you might have to improvise and think of your own projects based on the gaps within the company, and then work on those and give them to your boss or whoever is your supervisor. And tips to get the job that you want, like Amy and Katie have already said, the portfolio is very important. Articulating what you want to do and getting that down on and portrayed well is very important. And don't stress too much. Like, stay calm. There will be something. If you don't get an internship, it's not the end of the world. Just keep learning, keep making connections and working, and then you'll get there eventually.
Yeah. So for me, I worked at a publishing company in Muskoka. That was my internship. And I actually got the job off of Indeed, so I didn't get it off of Waterloo Works. But I would say what I learned in this position is and in the internship process is don't get stuck on one job that you really want. I know a lot of the time in GBDA, especially in these lunch and learns and stuff, they'll bring in Google and Facebook and like the big, huge companies, and they'll show you how amazing it is to work there, and it is. But so when I was going into my internship, I was really looking for those jobs, those big jobs where I would be getting all these crazy projects. And the publishing company I was working for was quite small. It had about 10 employees. And upon working there, I kind of realized that small companies have a lot of benefits as well, especially right now. I was one of two designers, so a lot of the work that I did was going out into the world, and I had a lot of responsibilities in the job that I may not have had in a larger company. Um, so I would say don't discredit small companies. They definitely have a lot of benefits, and they definitely, a lot of the time, you might even have a bigger impact on the overall company. Um, and also use it to find out what you don't want to do. Um, for me, I don't think I would want to work for a publishing company forever. It wasn't entirely what I wanted to do. The year before, I worked as a digital marketer for a different company, and after doing that position, even though I enjoyed it, I realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do. And instead of looking at experiences like that as wasted time, look at it as experience and realizing that you're one step closer to figuring out what you actually want to do. And yeah.
So I want to make sure that we have time to answer all your questions. So we'll just kind of run through this fairly quickly, these last bits. So I actually worked through almost every single semester of GBDA. So that was both through stuff through the school, the University of Waterloo, and also stuff outside of it. So I did TAing. I was a yearbook and communications officer for one of the residences. I was a digital media assistant for the Center for Teaching Excellence at the university. So there are a lot of different opportunities to have jobs to the university and make that money on the side and get that experience that you need. I know a couple of students had reached out and mentioned that, like they're very concerned about finances, and there are opportunities to make up for that where you need it. In terms of what I enjoyed most, I worked in both studio and very corporate settings. And in the beginning, I'd only worked in corporate, and I thought that that was definitely what I wanted, that I definitely wanted a 9-to-5 job at Google or Facebook or Shopify and all that stuff. And I'm certainly not saying that I would never want that ever. But working in a studio setting totally changed my perspective of the working life of a designer. It is totally different. There is kind of the idea that corporate is boring and design studios are super cool. I think that's not really like a super fair thing to say. There are a lot of benefits to working in corporate. You get those, set hours, you get that set pay, you have a lot more security in what you're constantly doing, and you're working on a much larger scale. Maybe you're designing something for the entire organization. But for me, what I enjoyed more was working in studio settings because I liked seeing projects from end to end. I wasn't a super big fan of just working on small parts and pieces. I like to kind of have an impact on where it was going to go and the direction it was going to have. There's also obviously a difference between salaries. It may not be a set salary with studios all the time, but their rates are a lot higher and a lot different. So they kind of work out a little bit differently. And in terms of timing, like studios can be more flexible in when you're working, but it does also mean that sometimes you're working longer hours and some days you're working shorter hours. So it's kind of what you want from a job in life, and that's going to kind of decide where you go. But I would strongly, strongly recommend that you try both, even if you think you know what you want. I think it's important to have that different perspective between the two. Michaela, do you want to talk about your startup experience?
Yeah, so a couple summers ago, I didn't have any money and I needed a job, and I wanted to be in Waterloo and I wanted to work for a startup. So they didn't have much money to fund me, but I ended up working for a music licensing startup and a kind of marketing startup called Uprise that was also working on another project. And I came in and got to wear many hats, which was really great because I was still figuring out which direction I wanted to go in. And I started out as a designer, which is not my strength, but what I did end up realizing was the large operational issues within a lot of the startups that I ended up working with. And because of that hectic environment, so many people were wearing different hats and accountability was hard to trace. And since a lot of people weren't being uh, compensated financially very much, people, you saw this kind of faith in the company dwindle a lot. So I was tasked with how do you find that and engage the employees to keep them motivated and still working in an organized process that creates efficiency within the workplace, but at the same time without inhibiting creative thought processes or innovative designs that were going to actually help that startup be what it was meant to be. So I ended up kind of creating operational design systems and doing a lot of market research. So I kind of had two different roles within the company. And I basically just read a lot and took concepts from books and then converted those different concepts into designs to create workflow processes for the employees to make them efficient, but still able to express themselves. So an example was like the one organization had very terrible communication amongst everybody. So we looked up like how do people communicate and why they communicate and who should they be communicating to, and then laid it out on a chart and actually made it interactive. So employees had to go through certain steps in order to achieve different kind of outcomes. So that was a very kind of volatile environment, which was very exciting. If you like excitement, if you like uncertainty, startup world might be a great choice for you. However, also don't get screwed over because there are a lot of startups and a lot of them fail. And you need to be good at identifying and researching that startup to see if it is actually a viable kind of company, because there are a lot that won't be successful, and that's not bad if they're not successful. But if you don't look at them properly and determine how you can measure your success there, then it may be a problem in the future when you're applying to other jobs. Because if it only lasts about a month and you are there and you can say, oh, I did all these things, but I don't really have anything to measure what I did there, then that doesn't look quite as good. So really just be cognizant and don't get too caught in the equity trap. Equity is really great in terms of building wealth and in the future, but at a younger age, also remembering that you need to be compensated for what you are doing reasonably. So just think about that. And then I'll answer some of the questions on the chat later.
And I don't mean to be skipping past Katie here, but we have a really big amount of questions and only about 15 minutes left. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to start reading some of the questions to you.
Yeah, no worries.
If we don't get through all of the questions, which we may not, hopefully there's a chance for the three of you to connect with students afterwards and be able to answer some more questions. So there's a couple questions here on freelancing. The first is, how important is finding a niche for freelancing and as a studio agency?
I think in terms of the niche, it's kind of like you have to pick a focus and what you're going to focus on. And actually right now we're going through an instance right now where clients come to us and asked us for something. And obviously we want to take on that project, but it's not what we do. They need a full stack developer, and that's not that's not something that we focus on. So I would say you need to pick what you're going to focus on, because you're probably not going to be able to do everything under the sun. And if you promise that you're going to do that, it's not going to be a good relationship or experience for you. In terms of finding a niche, I think the important part is more so focusing on what kind of agency or freelancer do you want to be. And what kind of people do you want to be helping or working with? So some people I work with, I'm close with one founder of a design agency, and they solely focus on helping nonprofits. So that's their niche and that's their specialty. And for us, we're kind of focusing more on, partially helping small businesses get online, because, with the state of the world, it's pretty tough and it's pretty essential. But also expanding and growing, and something that I had a conversation with someone about the other day, was being a design agency for designers. And so it's important for us to have a community that's connecting with other designers, encouraging creativity, and supporting other people as well. So I definitely think it's important, because you need to be able to identify your goals for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And on that same vein, how do you go about finding your first freelance client?
I mean, we're still in the very early stages of our business. So, everyone's going to tell you something different, and everybody's going to have something that works differently for them. I think we'd probably all agree across the board, and Michaela would have something else to say as well, though, is that you have to network and that you have to connect with people. You need to set aside time to have those 30-minute phone calls, even if it's just saying, hello, I exist. The phone calls aren't all going to be, here, I have an idea with a client, here's some work. A lot of them aren't, but it's really important that you tell the world that you exist, that you're there, that you're open for work, because in reality, like, all of our clients right now are all through people connecting them through us. So that's pretty essential.
Awesome. Okay, moving on. I'm going to ask a question about Go Abroad. How did you three maintain the relationships with friends that you made from your study abroad at Leeds?
I can answer that one. So for me specifically, I lived in an international residence. So the residence included people from all over the world. A lot of my friends were from Australia, some were from wherever. But for me, I found that even though I don't talk to them every day, even just yesterday, we planned a call to have this Sunday between the six of us. And there's only one time of day that we can do it because we're all in different time zones. But I think those, like, social media does really play a great part in keeping those relationships. I'm still friends with them all on Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. And even though we don't talk every day, it's things like just being connected and sending each other things every so often. We've actually been able to keep our friendship alive really well. If it weren't for the pandemic, I think a lot more of us would have visited each other by now. But I think that even though you can't see them, and even though it's very kind of difficult to think about a lot of the time, having so many friends all around the world, we have been able to keep our friendships alive through social media and stuff, because we did get so close while we were living together.
No, that's awesome. Social media is definitely very beneficial in that aspect. Okay, we have a couple questions related to design and your work. Let's start with this one. How do you find marketing related to UX? Could you compare and contrast the two? And is UX useful for marketing roles?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And that's what I've spent a lot of my time thinking about in the past. And marketing, you have to remember, is more along the lines of promoting. So getting people to kind of come to you, and then you are the step kind of before sales. And then user experience is watching people, understanding their behavior, analyzing how you're going to create the best experience for your kind of target audience or unexpected kind of users. So those two really come together in terms of the psychology and behavior of how people think and function. So I was listening to this not podcast, like video the other night, where it was really interesting because the gentleman was actually talking about the difference between marketing and branding, or sorry, branding and just having a logo. And that really related to marketing in terms of, he was saying, if you have Nike and then the Hyatt, if Nike decided to have a hotel, they have such a strong brand, you would know exactly what type of kind of hotel they might create or what you would expect for them, because a brand has expectations that need to be met from the company, because the users have expectations based on the brand of what they are going to get. And marketing really plays into that in terms of finding and researching all your competitors and how you find your place in the market and how what your competitive edge is, but also understanding the psychographics of everything and not just demographics or geographics. And then taking that data, you can use both of them. UX really flows into marketing if you take all that data and actually use it to help promote, and also on the UX side of things, actually make it a really great experience for those users. Now, some companies do kind of manipulate that to actually market, but not make it the best experience for the user necessarily, but for their company. So you kind of have to make a choice there as the UX and marketing specialist, whichever route you prefer to go.
That's great. That was a really good answer. Thank you, Michaela. Moving on. Okay, this is a bit of a long-winded question, so I will just read the whole thing out at once. The internship jobs are most likely contract jobs. Does that help you when applying to jobs afterwards? I know a lot of people say that the internship helps with applying to jobs afterwards, but I also know that if companies look at your job experience and see that you went to a lot of smaller, almost part-time contract jobs, they may not recognize how you can shift to a full-time in-house job in the work world. Could you speak to this at all? So I think long question short is, does, having these smaller part-time jobs affect the ability of getting a full-time job? I personally think it's pretty indicative of what it's like to be a university student and kind of getting internships and doing these entry-level positions. But Amy, do you want to chime in on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I had the same perspective. I was so focused on getting a really good internship because I wholeheartedly believed that it was going to dictate my future job after university. And that is definitely a very incorrect perspective to have. And it's also way too much pressure to put on yourself. What I would say is that I don't really think it matters if you're working for small businesses or Google. Like some businesses are going to say, obviously, okay, I can see you work for Google or Facebook and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's just what you show for. It's what you can say that you've done, the things that you've accomplished, like the projects that you've worked on. Because you could work at Google and you could have had nothing to show for it, or you could have done nothing meaningful. But you also could have worked at a startup per se, and you could have said, I led the design of an application and like raised $1 million and stuff like that. And that's much more quantifiable and meaningful to somebody that's going to hire you. So I would say it's really always going to be so much more with what you do about what you have, not just where exactly you're working.
Yeah, that is a great answer. I think this student, they've just put another message in the chat. I think they were meaning more, do you find that it would negatively affect your prospects of getting full-time work, having a bunch of shorter contract terms? And yeah, I mean, I also was a university grad at one point, and I can safely say that everyone who's coming out of university is really in the same boat. Most people have not had a chance to work full time because you are in school. So you are doing things like internships and summer contracts. And I think kind of playing back to what Amy said, I don't think it really matters if you have how long your work term or your work experience is, but it's what you can show for it, and what kind of meaningful things you were able to contribute to your roles, even if they were short, which is, I think, kind of the point that Amy was trying to make in that answer.
I also worked about probably like 5 or 6 jobs, all no longer than 8-month contracts, and a majority are 4-month. And I didn't have any issue. I'd never had a person ask like, "Oh, why?"
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear why you haven't had a, full-time year plus contract, and everyone's pretty much in the same boat there. Okay, just a couple more questions here, trying to be mindful of time. These more are related to the program and how it kind of helped you afterwards. The first question is, you've all mentioned a lot about design. Could you explain a bit more in depth about how GBDA design courses helped with more business roles in the real world? So I guess maybe how those courses connected to the business roles that you guys have been familiar with.
I would say personally, if I could go back to my GBD career, I wish I did actually focus more on some of the business courses, especially speaking as someone who's now kind of running their own business. When I speak to people and they hear that not only did I learn design, but I also learned business, like I can't picture one instance where they weren't incredibly impressed. They love to hear the fact that you understand how to apply what you're learning to their business, and having the understanding of how a business works, even if it's like general understanding, has always been incredibly impactful in their impression of GBDA students. So I definitely think it's very important for sure.
Awesome. That's great. Okay, I think we've made it to the final question. There were a few other questions that the three of you ended up answering in other answers and in your presentation. So the last question I have right now is, I've heard some of the upper year GBDA courses are a bit fast-paced due to the vastness / broadness of those courses. Did you find that to be true?
I think they were fast-paced in the sense where I felt like it was very uncontrollable and unmanageable. Like I said, the three of us worked on, I think, every group project together. I think it's a lot about balance and a lot about planning. You're given a lot of control over when you're working on things, how hard you're working on things. Like obviously I saw students that clearly felt that, it's a school project. And then you also have group projects that are, like they really took this the full 9 yards and wanted to make sure this was the best possible thing that they were creating. So it is fast paced in the sense that you're managing your own time. But I think that as long as you're aware of that and aware of your timelines, you're communicating with your group, there's no reason why it should be something that's completely overwhelming. I would also add that we have like our LinkedIns and Instagrams listed on the screen. If you have any specific questions, you want to chat with us one-on-one, we're all more than happy to answer specific questions after this. I would also say, even if you wanted to hop on a video call later, we're happy to have a more thorough discussion about anything you guys have.
That's awesome. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, so we'll leave this slide up for a few minutes here. If anyone wants to take a screenshot or copy down those Instagram or LinkedIn handles, definitely connect with Amy, Michaela, or Katie, or all three if you have questions about their specific roles, their experience in the program, and any tips and tricks for entering industry after graduation. We're pretty much almost at 11 a.m. on the dot, so we made great time. Yeah, thank you guys so much for presenting today. Judging from the immense number of questions and engagement, I think that students found this very helpful, and hopefully that gave all of our listeners some more insight into how GBDA connects with life after graduation and the types of positions that you might see yourself in.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll definitely be ready to help you guys.